Amina crouched behind the mango tree, the leaves brushing her face like a net trying to hold her in place, and listened. At first she thought the voices were talking about money or land, the small quiet things families argue about, but then Kojo's mother said it slow and sure, like a verdict, "We already sold the bride price." The words fell into the sunlit yard and everything went sharp. She heard Kojo swallow, heard his laugh that was never meant for her, and then the rest came out as if it had always been waiting to be spoken. It was not a promise or a blessing. It was a ledger entry. Months ago they had taken the money, they had signed, they had made arrangements with another family. The engagement was a paper transaction, not a union. Amina felt the ground slide away beneath her feet. Memories of the way Kojo held her hand, the plans they whispered under the evening sky, the dress she had imagined, all turned into paper that could be folded and put in a drawer. Her throat went dry, the mango scent swam around her like a memory, and for a moment she could hear only her own heartbeat. The compound carried on as if nothing had changed. Children chased a ball, a radio played, but to Amina the world had narrowed to one cruel line and the future she had been building vanished in the space between two words. Amina sat very still in Alyamo's small sitting room, pretending to fold a cloth while her ears did the real work. At first she only heard the easy sounds of a family at home, the clink of cups, the soft cough of a radio, but then Kojo's voice rose and there was a sharpness in it she had not noticed before. He laughed, proud and loud, and said, "Your diploma is useless here." The words landed like a stone. For a second Amina thought she had not understood, then the sentence came again, this time with his father's voice joining, colder and firmer, "We wanted someone who would keep the house, not run it." It was as if the room shrank and pushed all the air out of her lungs. Every plan she had made with Kojo, every small promise he had whispered, turned into questions she could not answer. Her degree, the years of study, the late nights and the proud ceremony where her family had smiled, all of it felt suddenly light and strange in her hands, like a book someone else had written. She remembered telling Kojo about her dreams, how she wanted to work, to teach, to make a life where both of them built a future. Now those words sounded naive. She had imagined partnership, not orders. She had pictured arguments that ended in laughter, decisions shared over tea. Instead she had walked into a sitting room where men decided what a woman was worth and measured her by how quiet she could be. A deep ache opened in her chest, not just for herself but for the hard truth that love could be used to cover a different plan. It was not that they disliked education, it was that they wanted a shape they could control. Amina felt small and very exposed, as if someone had taken the map of her life and drawn a new path that did not include her wishes. She could hear the radio spool on, the spoon against the cup, the family moving through the afternoon as if nothing had shifted, but inside her a line had been crossed. She stood up quietly, folded the cloth, and stepped out into the sun. The light felt different, too clear and sharp, revealing the road she had to walk away from. Her degree was not useless, she told herself, but in that room it had been declared so, and that declaration changed everything between her and the man she thought she loved. Zara crouched low by the veranda, the wooden boards warm under her palms, and listened without meaning to. Voices came from inside, soft at first, then cutting into the quiet like knives. Kojo's father spoke in a voice that did not ask. He said, "You must leave your money to our sons." The words were short and ugly. Zara felt them hit the air between the veranda and the sitting room. She knew at once this was not about gifts or help. It was about a promise written down, a rule that would follow Amina for the rest of her life. Kojo's father wanted a private clause, a sentence in a contract that would take away any control Amina had over what belonged to her. Money she earned. Land her family left her. Anything she could call hers would, by law and by paper, become theirs to pass on only to boys. Zara pictured Amina smiling, holding her purse, paying for a bus, thinking she had freedom. That picture cracked in Zara's head. She remembered Amina telling her once about saving for a small shop, about sending money home, about hoping one day to leave a little for her own children. In that one line those hopes were stolen. The men inside argued as if they were arranging crops, not a person's life. Kojo tried to soften it, said things about family and tradition, but his father kept returning to the same cold sentence. There was no talk of partnership, no respect for Amina's work. There was only the plan to lock her future into a box and hand the key to other people. Zara felt anger rise like heat. She had seen laws used like ropes around women before, and she knew how quietly a signed paper could erase years of struggle. The radio on the shelf hummed a silly tune, and for a moment the sound made everything crueler, because life went on as usual while they made a rule that would not let Amina decide for herself. Zara thought of walking in and shouting, of tearing up the paper, of telling Amina everything. Instead she stayed hidden, listening to each sentence fall, each clause tighten. When the meeting ended and footsteps moved toward the gate, Zara stepped back into the yard and watched Amina from across the path, pretending not to know. She could not let this happen. The clause had already shown her what the engagement really was. It was not love. It was control dressed in ceremony. Zara found her voice in that small moment and told Amina everything before the paper could be signed. The truth was a single, sharp thing, and the engagement broke like glass. Lella crowded herself behind the kitchen door, breath held so she would be invisible, and listened as the afternoon folded into a slow family argument. The smell of stew and palm oil came through the crack and the sound of plates being set down, ordinary noises that made what followed feel even stranger. Then Kojo's aunt spoke, her voice like a knife. "She's not from a proper line," she said, and a second later added, "We can't have her blood in our family." Those words landed on Lella like stones. For a moment she could only hear her own pulse, loud and quick. She had expected gossip, questions about dowry, perhaps a joke, but not that. Not that talk of blood and lines as if a person were a thing to be sorted. Lella thought of Amina's mother, the stories she told of small kindnesses, of a house that always had room for one more. She thought of the skirts Amina wore when they walked together, the way she laughed at small things, and the proud look on her face the day she announced the engagement. Now someone else was deciding that none of that mattered because the family did not come from the right place. The kitchen felt suddenly hot and tight, like a pot left too long on the fire. Inside, Kojo tried to calm his aunt, said something about love and about the heart, but the aunt would not be moved. She spoke of cousins and roots, of names on old papers, as if those papers could press a future into being. Her words were not private. They were public knives. Lella imagined the faces of Amina's family when they heard this, the slow folding of hope. It was a new kind of betrayal. No money changed hands. No contract was read. Instead a single phrase did the work of a wall. The phrase put distance where there had been plans. It made marriage into an inheritance problem, not a promise between two people. Lella felt anger and shame rise together. She wanted to storm in, to name the small cruelties and to tell the aunt what real families are made of. But she also knew how words like that can spread, how they can become a rumor that hardens into truth. So she stayed hidden and kept the sound of her breath steady until the voices moved on. When the arguing diminished and people began to clear plates, Lella stepped out with a face that showed nothing. She crossed the yard and found Amina, who smiled at her with the brave smile friends learn to wear. Lella did not return the smile. She took Amina's hand and squeezed it hard. Then she told her everything. The wedding plans unraveled that night, not because of a fight, but because a single sentence named a line that could not be crossed, and that naming was enough to break what had not yet begun. Nuru stood by the low stone wall that separated Mwembi's dusty road from the compound and listened because something about the way Kojo had smiled at Amina before told her this was not ordinary love but a story that needed watching. At first the voices were ordinary family voices, light and sure, but then Kojo's tone changed and he said the thing that made the air go thin, "We already promised her to my cousin." The words fell like a trap snapping shut. Nuru felt her hands go cold. Inside the house someone laughed and the sound sounded wrong now, like a record playing the same lie over and over. Kojo spoke about alliances and favors, about how families sometimes trade marriages the way others trade cattle or votes. His father explained, not cruelly, but as if explaining a business plan, that the cousin needed a marriage that would strengthen his position in town politics, that promises had been made at a meeting with men in suits, that this was part of a larger arrangement. Each sentence pulled a thread from Amina's life and made a pattern she had not been asked to join. Nuru thought of Amina's face when she had first said yes, the way she had pressed her palm to her heart and laughed like the future belonged to her. That future was suddenly a place where people moved her like a chess piece. Nuru pictured the cousin, a stranger who would carry Amina's name as if it were a tool. The idea of being promised to someone for another person's gain made Nuru's stomach turn. It was not only betrayal. It was the theft of choice. Kojo tried to say it was complicated, that promises to cousins were serious, that sometimes you had to think of family first. His voice was small now, as if he had realized the shape of what he had done. But the damage was done. Nuru could see, as clear as daylight, Amina's plans folding up, the small shop she wanted to open, the courses she planned to teach, the wedding dress she had pinned in her mind. Those were not just plans. They were parts of who Amina thought she was. Nuru left the wall and crossed the yard without making a sound. She did not want to be the one to break the news, but she could not let the story be rewritten without Amina knowing. She found her friend by the well and told her every word she had heard. Amina's hands trembled and for a moment she stared at Nuru as if trying to read a map that had been burned. The two women sat down and let the silence hold them like a shield. By sunset people were already speaking in low tones. The engagement that had felt like a bright walk toward tomorrow had been exposed as a negotiation in someone else's room. Trust, once gone, did not come back. The next morning the invitations were taken down and the calls stopped. What had been a promise between two people turned out to be a pawn in a bigger game, and when that truth arrived there was no way to pretend otherwise. Sephu crouched low by the rusty gate, her knees cold against the dust, and pretended to tie a loose shoelace while she listened. Voices floated out from the courtyard, low and careful at first, then a paper sound as someone slid a folder across a table. Kojo's voice reached her, steady and small, and she heard him say, "Sign this or the ceremony will not happen." The sentence was simple and empty of apology. Sephu felt the words land like a weight on her chest. Inside, his mother opened the folder and smiled in the way people smile when they expect no trouble. The smile did not reach her eyes. She read aloud the clauses as if naming a recipe, what Amina could keep, what she must give up, how any money or land the bride brought would be controlled by the husband or passed only to male heirs. The legal language sounded clean, like truth, but it was a trap dressed in paper. Kojo's father added things about family honor and protection, and everyone nodded as if the nods were a cure. Sephu watched their mouths move and could feel how small the space for Amina's life had become, measured now in clauses and signatures. She remembered Amina laughing as they walked to the market, the way she talked about saving for a small stall, the proud way she had said she wanted to keep her name and her money. Now those small dreams were written out in an ugly list that asked for her consent and called it love. Sephu wanted to burst through the gate, to tear the pages, to call out that no ceremony is worth signing away a life, but she also understood how papers can look final. A soft voice in the courtyard said the same thing over and over, like a chant, "Sign or we stop." The condition turned the wedding into an ultimatum. Sephu felt a rage that was hot and bright and a cold fear that clung to her like night. She thought of how easy it would be for Amina to think signing was the only way to make it right, to believe the promise of tomorrow. Instead, she knew it would be the first day of a small unfreedom. When Amina stepped out onto the path, smiling at the idea of a party, Sephu could not let her walk into a life bound by ink. She stepped forward, held Amina's arm, and said, quietly but with no room for doubt, that she had heard everything. Amina's face closed like a book. The music from a radio in the yard kept playing as if nothing had shifted, but something had shifted forever. They left the gate together. Later, the prenup sat folded on a table in an empty room. The ceremony was never held. What had been a promise turned into a paper prison, and the choice to walk away that day became the bravest kind of refusal. McKenna pressed her forehead softly against the cool windowpane and watched the yard beyond as if the scene there were a play she had no script for. At first the words were ordinary family talk, the kind that fills rooms and makes time feel safe, but then Kojo's uncle spoke with a tone that cut through the noise. We needed a daughter-in-law, not a daughter. The sentence landed in the room like a closed door. McKenna felt her breath catch. It was not a speech about roles or chores. It was a verdict about a person's place in someone else's life. Inside, the men smiled as if they had settled a difficult question. They talked about how a daughter-in-law should be taught to obey, how she should learn to keep the house and accept instructions. They spoke of respect and duty as if those words could hide the shape of what they wanted, a quiet person who would fit into their plans and make no trouble. McKenna could see Amina's face in her mind, bright and hopeful the day she had agreed to marry, the way she had spoken about building a small business and sharing decisions. The idea that those plans would be washed away by a sentence made McKenna's hands clench. She thought of what it means to be called a daughter. A daughter is someone with voice, with rights inside the family, someone who can inherit, speak her mind, and be counted. A daughter-in-law in their speech was a kind of stranger who could be taught to be small. The men framed it as tradition and protection, but McKenna heard the quieter truth: this was about control. They wanted someone whose loyalty they could shape, whose future they could set like a place on a map. That single phrase exposed the bargain built around Amina without her knowing. McKenna felt anger warm in her chest and a cold clarity settle at the same time. She imagined Amina learning to lower her eyes, to stop asking for more, to fold her dreams into tiny shapes. The picture made McKenna sick. She could not let a friend walk into a life where her choices would be eroded by polite language. When the conversation shifted to menus and flowers, McKenna stood, smoothed her dress, and went outside. She did not announce herself with a shout. She crossed the yard the way someone moves into a room they were never invited to, steady and direct. Amina looked up and smiled, not knowing the words that had been spoken about her like a verdict. McKenna took her hand and sat her down under the fig tree. With a clear voice she told Amina every sentence she had heard. The smile left slowly. Amina's fingers trembled. In that moment both women saw the choice laid out before them, to accept a role shaped by other people, or to walk away and keep the life you had planned. They left the house together that afternoon. The wedding that had been carved out by other people's expectations collapsed quietly, not with drama, but with the steady refusal of two women who chose each other and themselves over a name that would have made one of them small. Lela was standing by the back wall when the words hit her like a thrown stone. She had come to fetch water and stayed because Kojo had been laughing with his father about small things, the kind of easy talk that makes a house feel like a home. Then his father said, almost casual, "He's already married." For a moment the yard seemed to stop breathing. The sentence was short and clean and it carried everything that could break a life. Lela felt the bucket slip from her hand. Inside, people shifted, the bright tablecloth seemed suddenly too loud, and the radio that had been playing a love song dropped into a different key. Kojo's father explained, not with anger but with a calm that made it worse, that the marriage had happened abroad last year, that papers existed and witnesses had been named, and that the local engagement had been arranged as a performance for relatives and for face. The fact that the whole thing had been a show turned every smile into a lie. Lela thought of Amina, who had believed in the small promises and had pinned a dress to a board, who had told friends about a future that now looked like a photograph someone else had posed her for. The news spread through the compound faster than any whisper. By dusk the neighbors were at the gate, voices low and then rising, and by dawn the town was full of the story. Invitations were taken down, favors left unopened, and people who had come ready to celebrate left with questions that would not go away. The scandal did not just hurt pride. It stole trust. Lela watched Amina stand very still, taking in pieces of a life she had not known were missing. There were no dramatic speeches. There were calls, lies unspooled, and the slow unthreading of plans that had tasted like joy. In the end the wedding did not happen. The community that had been ready to cheer now talked about who had known and who had kept quiet. Lela held Amina's hand and felt how small and sharp the truth could be. They walked away together into a morning that felt empty and raw, carrying the knowledge that some sentences change everything.